European witchcraft is a complex historical and cultural phenomenon that evolved over centuries, leaving its mark on the dark side of medieval-era history. Its roots can be traced back to classical antiquity, where magic and religion were intertwined. In the Middle Ages, accusations of heresy and devil worship became more common. And by the early modern period, major witch hunts fueled by religious tensions and economic upheaval took place. Witches were seen as dangerous sorcerers in league with the devil, capable of causing harm through black magic. A feminist interpretation suggests that misogynistic views contributed to associating women with malevolent witchcraft. The 1486 treatise, Malleus Maleficarum, shaped witch hunts by providing a framework for prosecution. The Catholic Church's influence led to trials fueled by accusations, often targeting marginalized individuals. This included women, the elderly, and those deviating from societal norms. Despite the belief in magical healers, some were also accused of witchcraft. Magical healers, known as cunning folk, or wise people, were believed to undo bewitchment. They too were sometimes denounced as harmful witches, though they formed a minority of the accused. So let's delve into the origins of witchcraft in medieval history, starting with the very first case, the case of Alice Kyteler, 1263-1325. The case of Dame Alice Kyteler was the first recorded instance of a person condemned for witchcraft in Ireland. She fled to either England or Flanders, and there are no records of her after her escape from persecution. Her servant, Petronilla de Meath, was executed on November 3, 1324, after being tortured and confessing to the alleged heretical crimes committed by Kyteler and her followers. Kyteler was born in Kyteler's House, County Kilkenny, Ireland, as the only child of a Flemish family of merchants who settled in Ireland in the mid to late 13th century. She was married 4 times, to William Outlaw, Adam le Blund, Richard de Val, and Sir John le Poer. Formal charges were brought against Kyteler, including denying the power of Christ in the church, which was interpreted as worshiping the devil, sacrificing animals to demons, asking demons for advice on witchcraft, having an affair with an incubus, holding coven meetings and burning candles in the church at night without permission, making dark magic powders, ointments, and potions from alarming ingredients, allegedly used to corrupt her husbands, bewitching and causing the demise of her husbands to take their money for herself and her son, William Outlaw. But prior to sentencing, Kyteler, along with Petronilla de Meath's daughter, Basilia, fled. While at least 10 others were convicted in connection with Kyteler, they did not endeavor to escape alongside their leader. No records exist regarding her life post-escape, and both her date of death and burial site remain unknown. Just a few years after, in Aachen, within the Holy Roman Empire, modern-day Germany, a dancing plague broke out in 1374, and its cause remains unknown even today. On June 24, 1374, one of the largest outbreaks began in Aachen, spreading to places like Cologne, Flanders, Franconia, Hainaut, Metz, Strasbourg, Tongeren, Utrecht, and regions including Italy and Luxembourg. Further episodes occurred in 1375 and 1376 in France, Germany, and the Netherlands. In 1381, there was another outbreak in Augsburg. In 1418, Strasbourg experienced an outbreak with people fasting for days. Also, in 1428, in Schaffhausen, a monk danced to death, and the same year a group of women in Zurich reportedly entered a dancing frenzy. These outbreaks preceded the most famous dancing plague in 1518 in Strasbourg. The dancing plague cases in Europe significantly fueled the belief in witches and sorcery, leading to a surge in arrests of suspected practitioners and numerous witch trials. Anyone with unusual birthmarks or appearance faced the risk of being labeled a witch. Additionally, independent or unmarried women were often targeted under the assumption that they were more likely to be witches, based on rumors linking singleness with witchcraft. The plagues also played a major role in the belief in witches and witchcraft in medieval Europe. Among the most devastating events of this era were the plagues, with the Black Death 1347 to 1351 being the most notorious. These plagues not only decimated populations, but also sowed seeds of fear and uncertainty, significantly contributing to the belief in witches. The sheer scale of mortality created a climate of fear and desperation. Traditional explanations and remedies for disease failed to stop the spread, leaving people searching for scapegoats. In this context of panic and social breakdown, supernatural explanations gained traction. Medieval Europe was deeply religious, and the church played a central role in daily life. The plagues were often interpreted as divine punishment for sins, and religious leaders urged repentance. However, when divine intervention seemed insufficient, the populace began to look for more tangible culprits. The belief in witches, who were thought to consort with the devil and practice malevolent magic, provided a convenient explanation for the seemingly inexplicable suffering. The hunt for scapegoats often targeted the most vulnerable and marginalized members of society, particularly old women who lived alone or were otherwise socially isolated, were frequent targets. Their knowledge of herbal remedies and midwifery, once valued, was now viewed with suspicion. In times of crisis, these women were accused of witchcraft, blamed for the spread of disease, crop failures, and other misfortunes. The combination of religious fervor, legal endorsement, and social panic led to widespread witch trials and executions, particularly during periods of plagues. In this time period, the Valais witch trials, beginning in 1428, marked the first systematic witch hunt in Europe, setting the stage for the widespread witch trials that followed in later decades. By the summer of 1428, the entire Valais region was affected. On August 7th, the authorities in Luc issued formal procedures for conducting witch trials. According to the document, the slander of 3 or 4 neighbors was enough to warrant arrest and imprisonment, even for nobility. Torture was reserved for those slandered by 5 to 10 people, or accused by 3 individuals already tried and sentenced to death for sorcery. Historical account detail that victims were accused of murder, heresy, sorcery, and making pacts with the devil, who allegedly appeared as a black animal like a bear or a ram. Some accused were tortured to death without confessing, while others admitted to causing lameness, blindness, madness, miscarriage, and infertility. One of the most notable witches of the 15th century is Mother Shipton. Ursula Southiel, popularly known as Mother Shipton, was born in 1488 to Agatha Soothtail, allegedly in a cave outside the town of Knaresborough in North Yorkshire. The earliest accounts of her birth and life were collected in 1667 by author and biographer Richard Head, and later by J. Conyers in 1686. Both sources from 1667 and 1686 state that Shipton was born during a violent thunderstorm and was deformed and ugly, with a hunchback and bulging eyes. They also claim that Shipton cackled instead of crying after being born, and as she did so, the previously raging storm ceased. The sources report Ursula's mother, Agatha, as a poor and desolate orphan with no means to support herself. Allegedly influenced by the devil, Agatha engaged in an affair, resulting in Ursula's birth. Some variations of the legend claim that Agatha herself was a witch and summoned the devil to conceive Ursula. The true origin of Ursula's father is unknown, as Agatha refused to reveal his identity. At one point, she was compelled to appear before the local magistrate, but still did not disclose who he was. The scandal surrounding Agatha's life and Ursula's birth led to their ostracism, forcing them to live alone in the cave where Ursula was born for the first 2 years of her life. Rumors that Agatha was a witch and Ursula the spawn of Satan were fueled by the cave's well-known skull-shaped pool, which was believed to turn objects to stone. Today, the cave is known as Mother Shipton's Cave. Though the effects of the cave's pool are not true petrification, they closely resemble the process by which stalactites are formed, coating objects left in the cave with layers of minerals and essentially hardening porous objects until they become stone-like. According to 17th century sources, after 2 years living alone in the forest of Knaresborough, the abbot of Beverley intervened. He removed them from the cave, securing a place for Agatha in the convent of the Order of St. Bridget in Nottinghamshire, and placing Ursula with a foster family in Knaresborough, and so Agatha and Ursula would never see each other again. Contemporary descriptions and depictions suggest that Ursula had a large crooked nose, a hunchback, and crooked legs. These physical differences acted as a visual reminder of the secretive events of her birth, and the townspeople never forgot. While she found acceptance with her foster family and a few friends, Ursula was ultimately ostracized by most of the town. She found sanctuary in the woods, like her mother had, and spent most of her childhood learning about plants, herbs, and their medicinal properties. According to a source dating to 1686, an event occurred where the chief members of the parish were gathered together in a meeting. Ursula walked past the group while running an errand for her mother, and the men stopped to mock her, calling out, "Hag face," and "the devil's witch." Ursula continued her errands, but as the men sat back down, the ruff on the neck of one of the principal yeomen transformed into a toilet seat that clapped down around his neck. The man next to him began to laugh, and as he did, the hat he was wearing was suddenly replaced with a chamber pot. The gathered members of the parish laughed so loudly that the master of the house came running to see what was happening. When he tried to run through the door, he found himself blocked by a large pair of horns that had suddenly grown from his head. The source reports that the strange occurrences reverted to normal shortly afterward, and that the townspeople took them as a sign not to publicly mock Ursula. As Ursula grew, so did her knowledge of plants and herbs, and she became an invaluable resource for the townspeople as a herbalist. The respect she earned from her work gave her the opportunity to expand her social circle, and it was then that she met the local carpenter, Toby Shipton. When Ursula was 24 years old, she and Toby Shipton were married. From this point on, Ursula adopted her husband's surname and became known as Mother Shipton. The townspeople were shocked at their union and whispered that he must have been bewitched to marry her. About a month into her marriage, a neighbor came to the door and asked for her help, saying she had left her door open and a thief had come in and stolen a new smock and petticoat. Without hesitation, Mother Shipton calmed her neighbor and said she knew exactly who stole the clothing and would retrieve it the next day. The next morning, Mother Shipton and her neighbor went to the market cross. The woman who had stolen the clothing couldn't stop herself from putting the smock on over her clothes, the petticoat in her hand, and marching through town. When she arrived at the market cross, she began dancing and danced straight for Mother Shipton and her neighbor, all the while singing, "I stole my neighbor's smock and coat. I am a thief, and here I shout." When she reached Mother Shipton, she took off the smock, handed it over, and left. This particular story hints that most of the dancing plagues in the medieval era might have been caused by witches, especially the one caused by Frau Troffea in 1518 in Strasbourg, suggesting that Frau Troffea may have been under the influence of a witch who caused her to start dancing, or that she herself was a witch. 2 years later, in 1514, Toby Shipton died, and the town believed Ursula to have been responsible for his death. The grief of losing her husband and the harsh words of the town prompted Ursula Shipton to move into the woods and the same cave she had been born in for peace. Here she continued to create potions and herbal remedies for people. Mother Shipton's name slowly became more and more well-known, and people would travel far distances to see her and receive potions and spells. As her popularity grew, she became bolder and revealed she could see the future. She started by making small prophecies involving her town and the people within, and as her prophecies came true, she began telling prophecies of the monarchy and the future of the world. In 1537, King Henry VIII wrote a letter to the Duke of Norfolk in which he mentions a witch of York, believed by some to be a reference to Shipton. It is believed that this letter is the earliest reference to the real Mother Shipton, who would have been prophesying about Henry VIII at the time. In 1666, Samuel Pepys, an English diarist, recorded in his diaries that, while surveying the damage to London caused by the 1666 Great Fire in the company of the royal family, he heard them discuss Mother Shipton's prophecy of the event. Mother Shipton died in 1561, and she was buried in Knaresborough. Her grave is still a popular tourist attraction, and it is said that if you rub her nose on the statue of her at the cave, you will be granted a wish. There is also a famous petrifying well adjacent to the cave, which has been operating since 1630. Mother Shipton's story symbolizes the transition from sporadic witch accusations in the Middle Ages to the widespread witch hunts that characterized the early modern witch craze. Despite her association with witchcraft, there is no concrete evidence that she was tried or executed as a witch. However, her death around 1561 is often seen as marking the end of one era and the beginning of intense witch hunts in England and beyond. The timing of Mother Shipton's legend coincides with the rise of the witch craze in Europe, serving as a bridge between the medieval era's relatively isolated witch trials and the widespread hysteria of the early modern period. The early modern period, roughly spanning from the late 15th century to the 18th century, witnessed an unprecedented surge in witchcraft accusations and executions that far surpassed anything seen during the medieval era. While popular culture often depicts the Middle Ages as a dark time fraught with superstition and persecution, it was actually during the early modern period that the phenomenon of the witch craze reached its most intense and destructive heights. Several key factors contributed to this surge in witch hunts during the early modern period, including socio-political upheaval, religious transformations, and the development of legal systems that facilitated mass persecution. Certain regions in Europe were particularly notorious for their witch hunts during the early modern period. For example, the German territories experienced some of the most severe persecutions, with thousands of people executed. Similarly, the Salem witch trials in the American colonies, although occurring at the tail end of the period, are emblematic of the hysteria and judicial excesses of the time. In contrast, medieval Europe saw only sporadic and localized witch hunts, often driven by individual incidents rather than widespread societal panics. Now let's explore the origins of witches. As mentioned earlier, the medieval era was deeply religious. It may not surprise you to learn that the roots of these accusations are connected to a religious story involving King Saul, one of the earliest historical witches, if we exclude mythological figures and gods associated with witchcraft, is the Witch of Endor, who, according to the Hebrew Bible, was consulted by Saul to summon the spirit of the prophet Samuel. Saul wished to receive advice on defeating the Philistines in battle, after prior attempts to consult God through sacred lots and other means had failed. However, what is summoned, whether the actual ghost of Samuel or a spirit impersonating him, delivers a prophecy of doom against Saul and his army, who are subsequently defeated. This event occurs in the first book of Samuel and is also mentioned in the deuterocanonical book of Sirach. But when did the image of flying witches originate? Surprisingly, the origins of flying witches trace back to a nun named Matteuccia de Francesco, 1388-1428, an alleged Italian witch and nun, known as the Witch of Ripabianca after the village where she lived. Matteuccia was put on trial in Todi in 1428, accused of being a prostitute, committing desecration, and selling love potions since 1426. These accusations were not enough to issue a harsh punishment, as she was able to repent. Consequently, she was later accused of being a witch. She confessed to having sold medicine and to have flown to a tree in the shape of a fly on the back of a demon. She was found guilty of sorcery and executed. Her case was one of the earliest witch trials in Europe, and the first case where a witch is mentioned flying in the air. Not all witches were female. There were males too who were accused of witchcraft and sorcery. For example, Stedelin was a man accused of being a witch in Boltingen, Switzerland, between 1397 and 1406. After the harvest had failed in his village, Stedelin was accused of using black magic to destroy the crops, causing diseases to the cattle, sacrificing a black rooster on the Sabbath at a crossroad, and placing a lizard under the doorway of a local church. Peter von Greyerz, the judge of Simmental between 1398 and 1406, was a firm believer in witchcraft, which he believed had been introduced in Simmental by a nobleman named Scavius in 1375. Scavius claimed he could transform himself into a mouse, as recorded in Johannes Nieder's seminal work, Formicarius. Eventually, Stedelin was found guilty and executed. Sometimes, accusations against witches in the Middle Ages were used as a pretext to get rid of certain people. An example of this is the story of Veronica of Decius. Veronica of Decius was the second wife of Frederick II, Count of Celje. She is known for having been subjected to a witch trial by her father-in-law, who objected to her marriage to his son. Frederick married Veronica against the will of both his father and Emperor Sigismund. Veronica was of lesser status, and Frederick's father, Hermann II, was greatly opposed to the marriage. Emperor Sigismund called upon Frederick, and upon his arrival, had him captured and returned to his father. The chronicles of the Counts of Celje suggest that Hermann had his son arrested, and while holding him prisoner, initiated a witch trial against Veronica, accusing her of having enchanted Frederick. The witch trial failed. Provided with a good defense, she was acquitted by the court due to a lack of evidence. Despite the court's ruling, her father-in-law had her incarcerated in Oystrica Castle near Tabor, where he sent his knight to her on October 17, 1425, for obvious reasons. In the Middle Ages, even rich and well-educated women faced accusations of witchcraft. One notable example is Gentile Budrioli, also known as Gentile Cimieri, an Italian astrologer and herbal healer active in late 15th century Bologna. She studied at the University of Bologna and learned from Franciscan friars. Budrioli gained recognition for her healing skills and became a close friend of Ginevra Sforza, the wife of Bologna's ruler, Giovanni II Bentivoglio. Consequently, she quickly rose through the city's ranks and briefly served as a counselor at the Bolognese court. Budrioli's rise to fame aroused the envy of others, and in 1498 she was accused of witchcraft after failing to save one of Bentivoglio's sons from an unknown illness. The Inquisition took over Budrioli's case, fabricated evidence, and several people came forward to support the claims of her being a witch, including her husband Alessandro, who strongly opposed her scientific interests. Eventually, Budrioli was found guilty and executed. Following Gentile Budrioli is Elizabeth Pleinacher, 1513-1583, who was an alleged Austrian witch and one of the earliest early modern period witches. She was also the only person executed for sorcery in the city of Vienna. So if you want to know more about the history of witchcraft in the early modern period and learn about the witches who lived then, simply cast a spell of approval by conjuring a like with just a click.